Park Ranger Scott Irvine introduces the Park After Dark video series. He is shown from the waist up, standing in front of a white hearth. The hearth serves as a backdrop but also as a bookshelf for a couple of dozen old, leather-bound volumes and an antique clock. There is a framed print above the hearth, too, that is indistinguishable, except that it clearly is a black and white image. Irvine does not distinguish this setting in his talk, but it appears to be in a historic structure, from the type of creme to colored wood paneling on the walls. Irvine is wearing a traditional ranger uniform, with a khaki shirt that is colored. The shirt is short-sleeved and buttoned in the front, except for the top button, keeping the collar loose at his neck. The shirt has a small, rectangular, and golden name badge on the right side of it, just above one buttoned pocket, and a National Park Service badge on the left side of it, just above another matching buttoned pocket. A slight hint of the NPS Arrowhead logo is visible on his left sleeve, near his shoulder. Irvine's hair is peppered brown, white, and gray. He shaves the sides, even shorter than his beard, but on top, he lets it grow a bit longer, about the length of his full but trimmed beard. During his introduction, a dozen different images are shown intermittently on the screen while he talks. Each of these will be described briefly as they are shown on the screen.
Welcome to Fort Vancouver National Historical Site.
Fort Vancouver's wooden post palisade is shown from outside the gates, with a focus on the landmark bastion. The bastion is a roughly 2-story tall wooden tower. The first-story walls align with the wooden posts that surround the fort as its stockade. The second floor is a distinctive octagon shape, with small windows on each panel that face outward, serving as a watchtower of sorts for keeping track of the nearby Americans and their movements. Outside the stockade is a field of green, with a couple of stretches of fence posts. The sky is clear, ranging from white to light blue, and there is a flock of geese flying over the stockade. Behind the stockade, the tops of medium-sized trees can be spotted. The sun is starting to set, casting a warm light on one side of the bastion and dark shadows on the other.
This fall, we're unable to hold this event safely, so we've put a group of our volunteers together to film a series of Park After Dark videos.
In this black and white image, 4 costumed Fort Vancouver interpreters are shown posing in front of a historic building. They are standing in a row and looking into the camera. From left to right, the first interpreter is dressed as a military captain in a formal British uniform. His shirt and hat are dark colored, with light trimmings, such as epaulets and buttons. The second character, a woman holding an 1845 sign, has a less formal appearance, wearing an oversized dress. The third character is a woman in a dress as well, but she wears a top hat, like the fourth character, next to her. He has the look of a formal British gentleman. He wears a high collar and a silk cravat. He also is holding a decorative cane.
So you can learn more about people and places at Fort Vancouver. As we move into autumn, we hope you join us for this cozy evening. Fort Vancouver is a diverse community that includes Hudson's Bay Company officers, company employees, and their families.
A rectangular painting of Fort Vancouver from the mid-19th century illustrates a panoramic of what the fort looked like at its peak, around when it was called the New York of the Pacific. The perspective is from a distance, as if the viewer was looking at the scene from a hill a few miles away but with an unobstructed view. The bustling fort area has dozens of buildings inside the stockade and outside in the close vicinity, some of different heights and rectangular shapes but mostly made of unfinished wood. There are a couple of exceptions, such as the counting house, near the fort's gate, which is painted white. On the nearby Columbia River, in the background, a 3-masted ship sails by. In the foreground of the fort, there is a garden being tilled by a horse-drawn plow. A few people also are shown gathered near the gate, about to enter the fort, but they are too small in the image to distinguish any details about them. The south side of the Columbia River appears to be heavily forested. The north bank, where the fort sits, is mostly cleared but also still retains trees of different varieties, including an orderly orchard near the palisade.
From 1825 to the mid-19th century, Fort Vancouver was regional headquarters of the Hudson's Bay Company's Columbia Department. In the 1840s, this became an important stop on the Oregon Trail. 1845 was an important year for Fort Vancouver, and it was an important year for the National Park Service.
A series of 6 images are shown in rapid succession. The first is a photograph of a young man walking inside the fort's palisade in period dress. He is in the foreground and the focus of the image. He has on a red checkered hat, a long brown coat, a silk cravat, tan pants and high brown boots. The fort's field in this scene is yellow, like in fall, and there are a few indistinguishable people, including fort visitors, in the distance but still within the palisade walls. Part of one of the first door buildings also can be seen. It is a roughly 2-story tall wooden building without windows. The second image also shows people in period dress inside the stockade. This time, they are 7 young girls, in long dresses, playing a game in the grassy field inside the stockade with sticks and wooden hoops. The third image is a black and white archaeological map of the buildings inside the stockade, showing rectangles to represent the structures, with some minor topographical lines as well. The fourth image is a photograph of Fort Vancouver's kitchen, which is in the back of the chief factor's house. The kitchen has a rough-hewn and humble look, especially in contrast to the majestic and white painted walls of the chief factor's house. The kitchen has a covered entryway, where wheelbarrows and stacks of wood for the fireplaces are kept. It has a single window, near the door, on the first floor, but 2 additional windows, roughly above the door, on the second floor. The final 2 images show 2 different perspectives of the fort's bastion and stockade. One shows the same image from earlier in the video, of the bastion and the 2 fence segments. The second one is a dramatic silhouette of the bastion, at sunset, which highlights the pointedness of the roof and the tree line in the background, with a flock of birds flying over the scene.
The fort you see today is a reconstruction built on the archaeological footprint of the original, which stood here until it burnt down in the 1860s. When the National Park Service began the reconstruction in the late 1960s, they decided to recreate the fort as it appeared in 1845. But why 1845? 1845 was a year of great change for this community. When Fort Vancouver was built 20 years earlier, this territory was home to indigenous people, tribes, and nations.
A map is briefly shown that illustrates the area of the Pacific Northwest under dispute between British and American forces. This map spans from the 54th parallel to the 42nd parallel, staking out the extreme positions of either side. The countries eventually settled on the 49th parallel, where the current US and Canadian border is today, which meant that Fort Vancouver would have to be abandoned and the Hudson's Bay Company would move its operations several hundreds of miles to the north.
British trading posts like Fort Vancouver dotted the landscape. The 1830s had waves of disease due to the increasing presence of trappers and settlers. By the 1840s, missionaries and American immigrants were crossing the Oregon Trail.
In the first photo, a band of 4 pioneers on horses are shown traveling through a dry and grassy field. Each are equipped with a light-colored button-up, a cowboy hat, and a saddle. 3 of the 4 are gazing away from the camera, into the horizon, a pale blue sky divided by a dull green strip of flat farmland. The 4th's face, though turned toward the camera, is indistinguishably shaded by his hat. Behind the men on horses, travels a horse-pulled covered wagon. In the wagon, there are 2 shadowy figures who look to be a man and a woman. The woman, though her facial features cannot be seen, looks to the camera from the back of the wagon. The man, who sits in the front, is holding the reins of the horses. The second photo is a historic, black and white illustration of Oregon City in 1845. The drawing focuses on the multitude of rectangular-shaped houses and establishments that line the Willamette River in Oregon, in the town where McClellan moved after Fort Vancouver. Though hard to see, each building is decorated with small, arched windows, and the roofs are shaded both dark and light gray. Just outside the city, in the background, lies a church with a pointed steeple. Behind the city lies 3 distinct, thick layers of shrubbery and forest. Further in the background is the faint outline of Mount Hood. The foreground of the drawing shows the banks of the Willamette River. Across from Oregon City 4 people are standing near the water, amid a few trees and bushes.
These American immigrants formed a new government south of the Columbia River and challenged the Hudson's Bay Company's influence in the Northwest. At the same time, fur demand in Europe was on a decline, and the Hudson's Bay Company focused its attention to agricultural production.
This photograph shows a man in period dress holding a plow while it is pulled through a field by two brown horses. The man wears a straw hat, a long-sleeved blue shirt, long gray pants and boots. In the background is the fort's palisade, with a few rooftops and buildings visible over the top of the stockade wall.
1845 was an exciting time to be an American in the Pacific Northwest. Also a challenging time to be a Hudson's Bay Company employee. It was also a time of threat for Native American people.
This photograph shows two people in historic dress in front of a hearth, being warmed by a fire. One is dressed as a Native American woman, with long black hair and colorful clothes, including bright red pants with green and yellow stripes down the sides of the pant legs. She is handing a young boy a bowl. The boy appears to be British, by his long coat, spectacles, and silk cravat. He is wearing a bright red knitted hat. They are inside a small house, with various household items visible around the scene, including a teapot, hanging over the fire, some woven baskets, filled with roots and vegetables, and some animal pelts hanging over a bed frame.
As their lives would change forever. In this episode, you're going to learn about a 19th century kitchen, how it functioned, who worked in it, and who they served.
The next part of the video opens with Bob Prince, a Fort Vancouver volunteer working in the kitchen. He wears a traditional brown vest, an oversized light brown undershirt, an orange cravat, and tan trousers. His face is accented with a short beard, shoulder-length white hair, and a brown and white striped cap. Behind him is the darkly lit 19th century kitchen where candle-lit lanterns and silver cooking tools hang from the brick walls. The frame periodically switches from closer to longer shots. The longer shots reveal two tables covered in baking supplies, baskets, and vegetables. Behind Prince, a cooking fire and a shelf can be seen brimming with bowls and bottles. Intermittently throughout the video, images will be shown to help with the visualization of what the presenter is saying. Each of these images will be briefly described.
Hi, my name is Bob Prince. My character is Edward Spencer, who was the kitchen steward in 1845.
The first image of the two chief factors of the fort shows a black and white photograph of Dr. McLaughlin from the shoulders up. His rectangular face is distinguished by his furrowed and bushy eyebrows, large nose, frown, and mutton chops. His hair is uncombed and bright white. His gentleman's attire is dark and almost blends in with the picture's black background. The second image is a black and white photograph of Douglas from chest up. He is dressed in a black suit with a star-shaped lapel pin and white collar. Around his neck, he wears a thick strapped cord adorned with an oval-shaped medal. His turned head reveals a gray comb-over, white mutton chops, and a prominent nose.
The job of the steward, along with a couple of others that worked in here, was to prepare the food for Dr. McLaughlin and his family, and Mr. Douglas and his family. And what you see here in the kitchen for 1845 is a lot of differences from your kitchen at home today, based mainly on three things. There's no refrigeration, there's no electricity, and there's no running water. So that makes it quite different in terms of the way that we prepare food.
This series of photographs illustrates the words of the interpreter. First, a kitchen table is shown, focused on a couple of pots and pans on the table. It is night, with candle-lit lanterns illuminating the scene. Second, a pile of large chunks of ice are shown. It is a contemporary daytime photograph, with the ice chunks ranging in size from a baseball to a suitcase. Three images then show different angles on Fort Vancouver's well. The well has a wooden platform, like a small stage, next to a tree trunk-sized pole, about 20 feet tall. At the top of the thick pole is a metal bracket that holds a thinner tree trunk across it, like the top of a letter T has fallen to one side. That pole is more than twice the length of the base and less than half as thick. On one end, the end high in the air, an even thinner pole is connected to it on one end and a water pail on the other. This contraption is set up to draw water from the well. The next two images show costumed interpreters working in the kitchen. In the first one, a young man in a floppy hat stokes a fire in the oven, while an older man holds a teapot and a young boy offers his hand as help. In the second image, a costumed interpreter playing the part of a Native American tends a couple of large cast iron pots over an open flame. The final image of this sequence shows a variety of similar but slightly different sized and shaped spoons hanging over a hearth.
So we don't have ice to prepare it. We did occasionally. There was ice on the river and we could use it for certain things. A big feature, the running water. Well, you go into your kitchen, you turn on a faucet. Here, that's not the case. We go with buckets out to the well and then bring it in here. Electricity speaks for itself. We're just doing what we do and it's all done on the fire and in the oven. And another difference are some of the utensils that we used here. For instance, this in front of me right here, this was a potato masher. It's called a beetle. So this would have been made by our carpenters and we would just use it in a mashing action like that.
The first image in this series of 4 descriptions focuses on 2 men in the fort's carpentry shop. The standing man is dressed in a white striped shirt and mustard pants that are held up by suspenders. He is using an old-fashioned drilling tool to drill holes into a block of wood from a table. The seated man wears a light gray shirt, a brown vest, and amber-colored pants. He is also working with a piece of wood. The background is filled with wood scraps, tools and creations. On the table next to the standing man, there is the beginnings of the rocking chair. Next, Prince holds up a tool called a beetle. It is a wooden block shaped like a soup can, with a handle protruding from the top. To demonstrate how one should mash potatoes with the beetle, Prince lifts the beetle up and down in a mashing motion. The second image shows a bundle of wooden spoons in a ceramic jar. The third image features a silver strainer sitting on a table. The fourth image displays 2 loaves of bread. One is sirda and the other is dark brown with raisins. The bread sits next to a white cup and a wooden bowl of cut cantaloupe.
And that would take care of our mashing of potatoes. Other utensils that we had were spatulas, you're familiar with those, tasting spoons, ladles, strainers, and so forth. They accomplish the same thing that the tools do in your kitchens today. Well, right now I'm going to talk a little bit about the food, and I'm just going to sit down and we'll talk about what we have and where the food came from.
An illustration of Fort Vancouver's gardens are shown at the crossroads of the fort's village. The video pans over the illustration of a large garden. When the video returns to Prince in the kitchen, he now is seated behind a large wooden table filled with food, mostly fruits and vegetables, including a head of lettuce, cucumbers, potatoes, corn, and peppers. There also is a loaf of bread and a complete meal on a platter, which includes meat, potatoes, and vegetables. A couple of additional photographs then illustrate the food closer up. In the first image, 4 bowls and a basket are shown, filled to the tops, with lettuce in one, corn, potatoes, onions, and mushrooms in the others. The second image shows jars of pickled produce on shelves. The glass of the jars is dark, so they are hard to distinguish by contents, but the one closest to the camera appears to be filled with either peppers or carrots.
Let's talk first about the garden. You may have heard something about it already, but we had a massive garden, a very big one. We had to be self-sustaining. So everything that we needed from the growing season all the way through to the next growing season had to be either available as a fresh item or it had to be in some way preserved. This is a good time right now, as you can see. We have cabbages, we have corn, we have cucumbers, we have tomatoes, peppers, melons, apples. We have different kinds of squash, and those are the things that we would be using right now. In addition to the garden, we had orchards.
The first photograph in this series shows the pathway between 2 rows of apple trees. Below the tall and bushy trees, fallen apples can be seen in piles on the ground. The sky is a cloudy gray. The second image displays a ceramic bowl of thinly sliced, red apples. Though blurred in the background, a bowl of whole apples also can be seen. The third image shows a tree branch bearing 2 brown plump and speckled pears. The fourth image features a single, oval-shaped, light indigo prune drooping from its tree branch. The fourth image focuses on a golden brown cattle with pointy horns. The cow faces to the side so that its large body can be seen. Stray cows and a hilly green landscape fill the background. The fifth image centers around a sounder of small black pigs. One pig with long floppy ears and bright eyes is staring into the camera. The rest are searching the rough terrain for food. The sixth image shows a flock of white sheep. While most are grazing on the long grassy field, 2 black-faced sheep are trotting in the direction of the camera. Behind the field lies a thick forest. The seventh image features a flock of long-necked golden chickens with bright red crests. They are all strutting in the same direction to the side of the frame. The eighth shows a close-up of a cow being milked. A person is squeezing the udder and gathering milk into a ceramic container. Only his hands and blue shirt can be seen. The ninth picture is a close-up of 7 white chicken eggs resting in straw nest. The 10th image shows a close-up of a pile of unprocessed sheep wool tufts. The 11th image shows 2 large pieces of pork hanging from a ceiling rafter.
And in the orchards we had primarily apples. They had a lot of apples here. But there were other fruits such as pears and prunes and so forth. Now what did they do for meats? Well, they had a lot of livestock. They had cattle, they had hogs, they had sheep, they had flocks of chickens and turkeys. Those were the domesticated animals. Well, the cows were available for more than just meat. They provided us with milk and cream. Chickens provided us with eggs. Sheep provided us with wool. Pigs, however, became the primary protein, the primary meat. And the pig just didn't have another function except to provide food and to produce other pigs. And beside the garden and the orchards, we also had large fields of wheat and barley.
This series of photographs illustrates some of the dried goods at the fort. The first image shows dried stalks of wheat, still in the ground, with greenery in the background, as though they were part of a larger garden. The second photograph shows the wheat now ground into flour, in metal bowls on a table. The illustration of the HMS Modeste ship is shown again, to emphasize how trade in this time period functioned, slowly, and by ship. The final image in this sequence shows a wooden table with 4 white plates. On each plate is a different herb, such as parsley, thyme, and sage, with a squash in the middle of the arrangement.
And we used those, particularly the wheat, would have been ground at our mills to make flour. But there's a lot of things that are missing. We're missing sugars, we're missing spices, we're missing some of the other things. Where did they come from? We actually either had to purchase or we traded for them from the ships that came through. I had to order it. Well, ordering it meant writing it down, getting it onto the next ship, all the way to London, then it had to be packed and brought here. And so in 1845, there was no difference from the beginning of the fort period in the 1820s. It still took a long time for ships to make that trip from London to Fort Vancouver. Spices and herbs, well, we grew a lot of herbs here at the fort in the garden. The more common ones, parsley and thyme, sage, they were all grown here, but others, the more exotic ones, star anise, cinnamon, ginger, those that you hear about, they had to be traded for. So as the ships made their way from London all the way around the Cape, back up to here with the various stops, they picked up the spices and the other herbs and other items that we would have needed.
A series of images is shown of life in the kitchen. The first shows a steward peppering a pot. The next image pans a large piece of cooked pork, on a cutting table, with the meat's juices puddling around it, and a large knife nearby. The video then cuts to a scene in the chief factor's house dining room, with its distinctive green walls, and a row of formally dressed gentlemen, in period costume, standing next to their plates on the dining room table, waiting for the meal to commence. The last 3 images of this series show some of the food on spot dinnerware on a table, kitchen stewards working with a large piece of meat, with a fire burning in the hearth in the background, and a close-up image of the final meal, as served. Those finished plates show green beans, potatoes, meat, and bread, with glasses nearby filled with a reddish liquid.
All right, let's talk about some of the preparation of the foods and the meals that were served here. First of all, we had breakfast. It consisted of meats because their diet was very meat heavy. They had some cereals and they had toasts and jams and so forth, and this would have all been served as a breakfast. The next meal of the day was dinner, and that was the main meal of the day. It started about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and could have lasted about 2 hours. They could have served anywhere from 5, 6, or 7 courses during that meal. And all of that food had to be prepared in this kitchen, because that's where it all came from. Nothing was wasted in the preparation of the foods here. Okay, so you heard about the meals and that, but what about the drinks? What did they have to drink? Well, you think of coffee and tea. Neither coffee nor tea could have been produced here, so those are trade items again. They had a drink called shrub, and that was a popular drink here, and that was made out of syrups that were made out of the fruits that came from the garden, or sometimes the fruits that came from the orchards. They also had brandies and rums. They also had wines and beers.
This series of images illustrates more of the behind the scenes at Fort Vancouver. In the first photograph, large wooden shelves at Fort Vancouver are shown stocked with supplies, including candlestick holders, cups, pitchers, and bottles of jarred goods. Then, a Fort Vancouver illustration is shown that focuses on the location of the root cellars, near the gardens. The third image is an illustration of the meat processing, with a photograph of a large slab of pork, on a wooden platter, shown under candlelight, followed by an image of a white-coated kitchen steward at work, under candlelight as well. The next 3 images in this series show more food preparation scenes. The first features a wooden table, where 2 people, shown only by their hands, are rolling out and cutting sea biscuits. The second is an overview of the kitchen scene, populated by 2 young boys and an older man, all in period costumes. One boy is using a mortar and a pestle. The older man is pouring a cup of tea for the other boy, at the other side of the table. The fireplace behind them is dark, but the room is illuminated by at least 3 lanterns lit by candles. Then, in the final set of images in this video, a cast iron pot is shown hanging over an open flame. A table has been set with the food from the kitchen. Final preparations are being made by a kitchen steward, as he stirs a pot, and loaves of bread, cut and uncut, are being prepared for service. At the end of this video, when Prince says he is all done, he stands up, grabs the plate of food and walks off screen toward the dining room.
Well, everything was seasonal that I've talked about thus far. We had to preserve the foods so that we would have something to eat for the entire 4 seasons. So we had root cellars, which in turn kept potatoes and turnips and rutabagas. We kept any of the root vegetables in the root cellars, and they were kept cool in there. They were kept in barrels. We also kept cabbages in barrels, so we could use cabbage for most of the year. We salted foods, we brined foods, we preserved them in jars or crocks. We smoked meats. In fact, over the fire, if we had leftover a large piece of pork or something, we could leave that over the fire in the evening, and then by the morning it would be partially smoked, and then we could do that day after day after day. We also had smokehouses here. We would grind up meat and make sausages. The sausages would be smoked and then stored. We could make dried fish. These we got this idea from the Native Americans largely, because that's how they had their fish. They dried the fish and they kept it. We traded for the dried fish, or we dried it ourselves. In the hunting seasons, we could get venison, we could get elk, we could get rabbits, we could get squirrels, we could get game birds. The stewards were up at 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. They had to get the fires going. They had to get dough made for the breads. They had to get all the vegetables prepped. And there were also 2 or 3 young men who were aspiring stewards. They liked to do that, or they were assigned that job. And they would be in here to help. They would do the serving. They would do a lot of the cleanup. We'd have a soup pot on for the soup of the day, whatever it turned out to be. Salads were easy enough to prepare. But then the meats. How many people are we serving? 20 or 25. So it's not just getting a small amount of meat and cooking for a family of 4. It's cooking 4 or 5 times that. And so that makes it a lot more difficult. And look where we're cooking. We're cooking on this fireplace, this hearth. So things would be pre-made, they would be kept warm, you make them so far, you finish them off, you put the sauces on, you get ready to serve, you put them on plates, and you get ready. Now, what we have here today is we have some creamed cabbage, we have stewed tomatoes, we have potatoes and squash, and there's the bell. So I've got to get this over there and get it up to the dining hall, and we're all done.
These are the credits listed at the end of this video and the final piece of audio description provided. National Park Service at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Presence Park After Dark. An interpretive video series. Producer. Teresa E. Langford, Cultural Resources Program Manager. National Park Service at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Associate Producer. Scott Irvine, Park Guide. National Park Service at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Distribution Coordinator. Megan Huff, Curator. National Park Service at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Research. Eva Aribulo. SPU Coordinator. National Park Service at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Editor Forward Update Videographer. Mark Dodd. Me and the Magman Productions. Interpreters. Reggie Coates. Magdala Mata. Nancy Funk. Sabrina Hansen. Samantha Hansen. Bob Prince. Jeremy Schaefer. Parker Schaefer. Media Contributors. A. Atwood, Victor Dallins, Doug Fisher. George Gibbs, NPS, Carrie Hendricks, Charles Elestad. John B. Horner, Howard Hunt, Wayne Hunter. Scott Irvine, Paul Kane, Ross Kaplan, Ray Klein. Matthew Klossick, Jody Neeland, Frank Lahman. Juno Laurie, NPS, Vic Julie Paget, Marilu Colby. Dave Powell, USDA Forest Service, Jenny Ray D. Zegans. Henry Wren, Susan Sheets, Walter Seidmund. Lois Sums, Lori Taylor, Vidin Taylor, Lynn Thompson. Shark Talk, Troy Wayron and Ty Watts. Robert Wheeler, John A. Wyeth, MD, Sarah's Scenes. Fernando Bravo. Litho Fort Gustavus Sohn National Park Service. Painting Village, Diana Bonin National Park Service. Richard Schlecht, Fova Painting. Day and Ha Publishers, Engravers Dutton. Thomas Goldsworth, Engraver, Inglefield. Lieutenant Artist, Messrs. Force Publishers. Hello, E.J. Artists, Stracker, Engraver. British Columbia Archives. Courtesy of the Mariners Museum and Park. National Archives and Records Administration. National Park Service. Photo Sitka 25471 E.W. Merrill, Sitka National Historical Park. Music Contributors. Heartstrings featuring Nancy and Rob Downey. Emily Coder. Special thanks to Tracy Fortman, Superintendent. National Park Service at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. Copyright 2020.